Okay, Mayor, I want to start with the discussion that the council had on February 11th. Request to approve job order 7469. This is the Marshfield Utilities
Correct.
project. It was on the agenda, and it just seemed that there was, I don't know if confusion is the right word over what the council was being asked to approve, but the discussion was kind of interesting. Take us back to that discussion, what you heard, and I guess where it was left at the end of the night.
So the basis of it was Alderman Fisher said that he was expecting numbers to come with the job order. And so I asked that the Nick to go over again what he had been to two meetings before, because two council meetings before that, the commission came to the council with a 50-minute presentation that was long. I mean, it was long. And it went over how many, space needs, why they need it, and we had, a good graphic there and a tour of the current facility, how they're just cramped. Why they, kind of a layout or a rendering, if you will, of what the new place will look like, and a budgeted amount of $17.5 million based on office square footage, per square footage requirements, and then a lot of it is going to be big warehouse stuff, and that's really basically all they have are rough numbers at this time because they have to go. So, and at that time, opened up to questions for the council, and there really weren't any questions from there. So that the presentation was good. Go to the next meeting, and I guess that's what was surprising the other night. At the first meeting, when not city staff, the utility was there and they're going over everything. If people would have questions, that's where you would think, okay, now we're going to get questions because you just went through the presentation. Comes to the meeting the next time and there's an update that it went to the commission and they approved the $17.5 million estimate that's there now, and I'll explain that in a second. So then when they came there, we discussed it again at that council meeting. Very few questions, updates and whatnot, and then it went in, and then at that time, Mr. Fisher said, it'd be nice if this just wasn't put into the consent agenda, because it was in the consent agenda when that the Marshfield Utilities approves it, if we actually discuss it. That's a good point. So it was in the consent agenda, and then we made a special item for it. And then when it came out, surprisingly, there were questions on a work order with numbers that would be there in how much this is going to cost to build. And when it was explained the first time, it was, this is a series, and this is differently than if we do a city project. They need to get these approvals so then they can go to the different, the Wisconsin utility folks, get their blessing on the concept. And then at that time, you go and once you get all the layout and everything, then you're going to send it out to bids. Then once you have all of those approvals, I mean, we're talking 8 or 9 months down the road. And then at that time, those prints and bids would then go to the planning commission for review to make sure that everything is there. Well, one of the questions the other night is, can we send it to the planning commission now? We don't have anything other than ideas to send there. That so far everything is just renderings and cost budgets. We need real numbers to go with. What's your parking lot plan going to be? What are you going to have, islands out there? Are you going to have trees? What are you going to have? So it's a lot to get to the planning commission. And then once the planning commission approves or denies it, then it goes to council. That's when they get the final actually bonding approval from the council. And it just seems like that there were members of the council the other night that thought that that process should take place now. So I just don't think that there was an understanding of the prior two meetings of what was explained to them. So it actually did end up passing 6-3. There were other concerns there. One council member thought that, we're doing a lot of different projects and the utility space programs are there. So some good questions at the first or second meeting, if council members were concerned about it, at that time during the presentation would have been, do you need that big a building? Can that be scaled down? That would have been an appropriate question. Or can you do all these things? But now when we go to this, these other things come up, it was really quite baffling. But it did pass, so now they will continue to go through. Nobody, myself, city staff, all the council members, nobody wants to spend over on any more on this than we have to. So for instance, all this gave them the right to do was to go out and start getting their bids and start getting their approvals. This was not necessarily a blessing on approving it, because if they come back and after they get their bids, it's 21 million, then they're gonna have to make some reductions, or they're gonna have to do something different. Because there's no palette to go that much higher. So I think there was just a misunderstanding there on what was being approved, even though we had been through this extensively twice before.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, we often use the phrase in our regular personal life, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Do you put the cart before the horse? All these kind of things to talk about the order. And I think the questions and concerns were raised that night were good ones by Councilmember Fisher and others. But I think what Nick was trying to get to in his memo that you have in front of you and what was being presented, the idea that you can't even get to the point of going to the Planning Commission or to the bidding process and stuff until you actually do some groundwork. We've had to do the same thing with our own city projects, whether it's a library, whether it's a fire station. You have to come up with a design, you have to come up with architectural plans and drawings and look at the site. Can we make it work spatially? Do we need to change our setbacks, and is that going to modify the size of the building? That's the kind of permission that they were looking for to keep the process moving. They can't even come to the commission, the planning commission in summer or whenever it is, without being able to draw upon that information. So I think maybe some people might have thought you're looking at approving the whole program at one time. The other thing, and I've talked to Adam a little bit, is the thought that, well, what if they go into this process and they spend the money on design and architectural plans and stuff, and then they come to the conclusion that they can't make this work? Well, then all that money that's been spent, what happens? Does that get charged to the ratepayers and whatever? And we get that. We have the same issue with our own city projects, but it is the only way that you can find out what the true cost is going to be ultimately, and whether or not what you're planning to do is feasible. So you have to spend some time and money on the front end to be able to get to the point of packaging what the proposal is.
And this is why it was, because the question, of course, is, well, what if we get down that road, a year down the road, you get these approvals, and then Planning Commission denies it, Council denies it, or it came in at 21 million, and now the amount of money that they've used, in essence, you could say that the ratepayers will do that. Well, you've got to get to that point. As an example, as I discussed, there's currently the Board of Public Works, of which many of the people that had questions on this and were concerned about this, they actually sit on that board. Well, back in December, they approved $27,000 cost to do a space need assessments for the city yard. And so in doing that, to see is, do we go somewhere else? Do we stay there? Do we add on? What do we do? That doesn't mean that we're going to do that, because we're not looking at doing anything immediate on that. This lets you know for your long-range planning what it is that you need to do. So the equivalent is, let's say that you spend this $27,000 and then you decide you're going to do nothing. Well, who pays that $27,000? Well, that's part of taxpayer money. But you have to go through that expense to see what is feasible. The way the utility is doing it, they're using, in essence, the exact same process. They're going through that expense part, and if it comes up to where it can't be worked on, then it can't be done. And then they would have to retool. They would have to think, okay, maybe we take it down from 17 and a half. Right now, of course, nobody's excited about a $17.5 million project. And a lot of people have say, I've heard, why don't you move the building to other buildings that are vacant, and then you don't have to go through the expense? Well, here's the thing. The cost to move the other utilities that are currently there would be 3 times the amount of this construction. So you have to, when you look at these types of things, you can't just look at this one item. You have to look at the whole thing. And so in that case, it is a big project. It is a lot of money. But they're looking at this to be a building they can have for 50 to 60 to 70 years. And so now that doesn't get away from having to do that. And the city's portion of this, I think, is important for everybody to remember. All we're doing is authorizing the bonding.
Yeah.
So we're not, the utility will pay for this.
Yeah, good point at the end. None of this will ever come from tax revenue. It will all come from ratepayers. And they have a lot of scrutiny down there in Madison with the PSC, the Public Service Commission. So in terms of what rates will be allowed and the payment for this project over what period of time, that'll all be heavily critiqued outside of city government, because again, it's not our money coming from the taxpayers. But I do think, maybe we can learn a little bit from what's gone down in these questions. Like I said, there were good questions raised, and prepare in the future for that type of thing, maybe with a little bit, I don't know, maybe you could have a not to exceed dollar amount on those job orders or something. But I am pleased that they moved it forward, because again, this is what's going to allow them to really develop their plan.
Anything else on that one?
Yeah, I think Steve and I see this a little bit differently. That's odd that you and I see it.
We don't do, that's not
We
often,
never
you're
do
right,
that.
that's true.
There were good questions asked. I am very concerned with city staff, because this is not the first time where city staff will work, and in this case, the utility commission will invest hundreds of hours in a project. They'll bring it to the council. They'll give a presentation to the council, go over how much it's going to cost and everything, and do almost like a first reading. And then there are no questions. And at that time, they're always given ask questions. Now let's go in and let's tear this apart and let's put it back together. Let's beat it up now. And no questions. Come back for a second time and go through. Do you want to do this? Yeah, this looks good. Let's move forward with this. Okay, that's the second time with all the same information. Then come back to the third time to, okay, now we need your blessing to do it. And then suddenly the questions show up, and it's like, now, older folks can always make a decision to change their mind. They always have that platform. But the questions that they would bring up are not new. And if they were originated the first time they saw it, then city staff, or in this case the utility, can go back to maybe to the drawing board or redraw or something like that. But to wait until the 11th hour, I believe, I think sometimes that works on city staff.
Let me add, you and I don't disagree on that. We really don't. What I said was the questions are good. I agree with you. I'd like to have seen some of those questions come out earlier during the initial presentation. I think, Nick was almost begging for some Q&A time after he got done speaking in the first January meeting. And I have seen that in other council meetings, as you have, where, we'll have a first reading of something or a second reading, and we're nearing the finish line, and then things come up that were never brought up before. And that is frustrating. So I didn't mean to say that the timing wasn't something that, we need to be sharper on going down the road.
Okay, Mayor, there was also a presentation of a preliminary draft of 5-year financial management plan, is that right?
Yes.
Can you tell me about that a little bit? Some of the details, or what you heard, or what is the goal of this, or what and not only the goal, but the future of it now, after the council heard a presentation about this the other night?
So you're aware of our issue back in 2018, which is behind us. We now have Ellers working with us, and Ron Amman he's an incredible person in finance. And when you put him together with Ellers and this David Ferris, the long-range plan that they have for us, I think, is very exciting. It clearly shows how we got here, where we are, and it's not a doomsday thing, and this is where we're going. And so we know that things are going to be a little tight for this year. It shows that our TID projects are doing very well. And because of that, that really helps when those values go up on these things. It really helps the tax base a lot. So the overall plan, I think, was very good. And it's really, really nice to know that the city financially, although we are going to go through some tough times here, we do see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I believe they met earlier with city staff, the department heads, so that they can see, we always we always have to control expenses. But at the same time, trucks break down, and you can only repair a truck so much before it costs you more to repair it every year than to get an updated truck or a new truck. And so we've been going to city staff now for years saying, cut, 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 cut. Well, now they know that for the next 3 years, when they present their budgets, they're already going to be in a position where they're watching it, and only requesting the things that they really need. So I think we're very, very clear on how to get our Moody's rating up. We're very clear on our current debt capacity. Overall, I think the program was well. And at the very end, I asked them some questions on, before, it sounds like the issue that we ran into was that there was no checks and balances. There was no second look, if you will, that really caught it. There was no QC, if you will, of it. Now, there's a QC in there, and Ellers is very well aware that, although I have 100% faith in Ron, if something wasn't right, they would then bring it to the city administrator's attention and ultimately the council. Because when Steve puts together the budget, that takes a long time. And if you ever look at the detail in Steve's budget, I mean, it's down to the penny. It really is incredible. And he is relying on the information of all the department heads. And so I think that now we are in a great shape to where now when Steve gets that information, he's going to be able to rely on it being accurate.
I would agree. And just to add, I think we are in a much better position than we were a year ago. I mean, we've not only have we identified and cleared up the problems, but we've really done some things. Ron has done an outstanding job, as the mayor said, in terms of identifying some opportunities to make sure that we're getting some cost savings where we can, that the utility, the enterprise funds, the wastewater utility and the EMS are paying their fair share of just broad overhead expenses. And so a lot of good things have happened. There are going to be some tighter years coming up, and we've talked about what that means. At staff level, we're talking about how to curtail or cap expenses going forward. You won't be seeing in the next few years a lot of new programs coming forth. Department heads would always love to say, I got a great idea for a new program. If we spend this much money, we can hire a part-time staff person and we can do all these things. You're not likely to see much of that. We're in maintenance mode for a while, but we'll get through it. I know that there might have been a couple of council members, maybe a few thrown for a loop by what Dave was saying about possible revenue ideas to look at. He just threw them out there. His thought is that to bridge the gap, you're going to have to do some expense cutting. Maybe some revenue ideas would help bridge the gap as well. There's nothing on the immediate docket that we're going to propose all sorts of new fees and taxes, believe me. But we would be foolish not to look at some of the things that are being done in other communities and whether or not they are positive, if they're defensible, and if they would apply to us. And if they don't, or if they're not supported, we won't go there. We're going to make it. We're going to comply with levy limits. We're going to comply with expenditure restraint to get that payment annually. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of how to get to the finish line. But the thing I really like the most about this, staff has needed this for a long time. Council has too, although council doesn't talk about it a lot. Staff has talked about it off and on. This 5-year financial plan now ties together the CIP, the budget, the debt schedules, the special funds into a roadmap. So now when we go through CIP and someone says to Dan Kinneck or to me, well, how much can we afford to borrow on capital projects each year for the next 5 years? Instead of just saying, well, the amount we think is good is this. We now know that the amount needs to be tied to what we do in the budget. Here's how it needs to tie. Here's how it needs to be adjusted over the years to make sure we're not borrowing too much. There's an overall, picture it as a football team. There's a total game plan between the offense and the defense and the special teams in a way that we haven't had comprehensively before. I'm not saying we haven't looked at those things together, but comprehensively, this is a first for us, and it's going to really help us in financial planning.
And I would say that when this debacle happened a year ago now, there was a lot that really had to take place. And I remember the day that Steve called and asked if I could come down and talk with him and Ron. And when I walked in the room, I'm like, oh my gosh, what happened? I mean, and what I really appreciate under Steve's leadership is how, okay, this is the problem. Now we're not going to dwell on it, how we got here. We'll figure that out. But we're gonna trudge forward. And Steve has brought in, who met with Ellers the other day, department heads. So now, company-wide, if you will, or organization-wide, everybody is vested into the program and understands where we need to go. So it's not just where, okay, at budget time, department heads just start throwing in things and then, we have to cut $10 million worth of stuff. They don't know what's going on. Nope. The entire organization is well aware of it. And it's very interesting because you've got this, which you look for in an organization, this true feeling of camaraderie, like, all right, let's go at this together. And I will say that is a direct correlation to Steve's leadership and what he has done. It has absolutely been phenomenal.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else on that?
Nope.
So,
Okay, closed session. There were a couple of items on closed session. I don't know if you can talk about any of them. Steve, is that a question for you?
Yeah, it is. We had 4 items on closed session, and as often the case, there's not a lot we can say. You realize many of these go through a process before we get some sort of resolution. And then, of course, we always have to come out and vote and take action and tell the world what the resolution was. You have one of those before you today. We did have a request for the council to review a personal property tax claim from Marshfield Clinic, and it's in the amount of $97,000. What's going on here is, you may know that a couple of years ago the state changed the personal property tax system. They expanded the exemptions for certain types of equipment to be a little bit more lenient for companies and organizations that have various types of equipment. And every year the assessor gets information sent to him by the companies, by the organizations, and says, look, here's the stuff we own that we believe is exempt. So where you think we ought to be paying personal property tax based upon all these items, we think these ones shouldn't be counted because under state law, they really ought not be counted. And so the clinic has been talking with the assessor, and they've been suggesting that they believe more of the items that they have been taxed on, if you will, through personal property, are now, under the new law, really exempt. And the law is not perfectly clear, hard to believe from Madison, but there's some leeway left to the imagination in terms of what constitutes the equipment the way it's defined that would be not eligible for personal property tax. The city assessor does not believe he's had information that to him suggests that their request is valid. So the council did deny the claim. Now the clinic does have time if they want to appeal this, and I'm sure they'll look at that. And if they did, they'd go to circuit court. Also, though, they'll, I'm sure, continue to work with our assessor in terms of providing more information, sitting down with our assessor to try and suggest, well, this is why we believe these pieces of equipment really do fit under the new state law exemption. And the city assessor may agree ultimately, he may disagree, but at this time, he didn't believe he had anywhere near the information to suggest that this ought to be removed from the tax roll. So there's nothing adversarial about this. There's not people from the clinic and the city arguing in the streets. It's just a disagreement right now, and they're doing what they think they need to do, as they should, I guess, but our assessor doesn't see that the new law covers the items that are at least being put forward to him so far.
Okay. Anything else on the other ones that you can tell us about? Acquisition of land located in downtown area?
Yeah, and I can't really say much about that, except to say that periodically it becomes apparent that a property in the city or more than one property might be, going up for sale. Somebody might, and, there's sometimes circumstances where you look at the city's plans and you say, well, if the city acquired this piece of property, would it fit into our plan? Is there some kind of redevelopment we'd like to do or see somebody else do if we could work with a developer to make the property better, there you go.
Yeah.
Better in terms of tax base, higher use than what it is. Sometimes you might have properties that are deteriorating. And so periodically, this is a revolutionary for us to get something like this. Periodically, the Development Services Director, Josh Miller, or somebody else will say, do you want to consider this? So the council talked about it, and this something may come from this, it may not. But you look at opportunities when they come up. You may recall that when we purchased the Baltus building, it became apparent that John Baltus was looking at selling, and so it was brought to the attention of the council. Would it be beneficial to the city in the near term or the long term? And those kind of conversations pop up from time to time on closed session. Otherwise, there's really not much I can comment on at this point.
All right. That's all I have.